Welcome back. I hope you had a great time meeting other attendees during the break. I'm Tammy Williams, founder and managing partner at Be Good Partners, and I'm also a longtime member and consultant with Elevate Network. I'm very excited to welcome you back to our second panel of the day. Next up is the rise of AI, evolution at work. And you know, everybody is talking about AI these days. Kicking things off, please welcome Vivienne Ming, theoretical neuroscientist, entrepreneur, author, and founder at Socos Labs and the Human Trust, to the stage.
Lovely. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction. And normally I don't feel comfortable unless I have a solid 3 to 10 hours of speaking time. I've got 10 minutes, maybe less. So I wanted to share a recent experience I had. I was giving a keynote inside a large multinational company, and they had a special session I was able to sit in on, talking about how their employees should think of using AI, and by which they largely meant large language models, GPT, that sort of thing. And it really struck me that everything they talked about was how to make your life easier, how to take away the busy work of the day. In fact, one of the main recommendations they had, 2 of them were interestingly complementary. One was stop wasting time reading your emails and have GPT summarize them for you. And the other was stop wasting time writing your emails, have GPT write them for you. And now I'm thinking, what the fuck are we doing with any of this? Can't we just cut out the middleman and let AI run the company? What is the point of building AI to treat us like invalids? If those emails are too long, maybe we should write them shorter. I want to share a different approach to AI, an approach which not uniquely focused on how women approach the world, but research has shown much better fits how we engage with our work, and in fact is much better approach to AI in general. I have a general rule in all of my work. Technology should not only make us better when we're using it, we should be better than where we started when we turn it off again. And right now, the whole thrust of how the world wants to engage with AI seems to be make my life easy, take away all of the busy work. And yet, when you look at the results, all of the published papers on how AI is changing work, all we really are seeing is a bunch of new employees with limited experience and skills speeding up how quickly they can get jobs done. And I virtually guarantee not actually learning how to do their job. Let me propose a different approach, and one with an example that goes back many years. And I know I'm almost out of time, so let me really summarize quickly. I was the chief scientist of one of the first companies using AI in hiring, and I was getting calls from economists and others talking about gender wage gap. Dr. Ming, what does your data say about gender wage gap? Because every paper says women get paid less, in large part because we choose to work fewer hours than men. And there's a lot of data from a lot of different people. It feels hard to refute, except that was the end of the story. Not why are women making different choices than men, but just they're different, which is absurd. So I dug into my database of 122 million people. I crawled through the websites of 60,000 companies, the 60,000 largest companies in the world. And long story short, what I discovered was that the single biggest predictor of gender wage gap, or rather the reverse, how small it was how many female leaders were pictured on the leadership team. if there was a female CEO, if there were more female board members, it turns out the same young women that choose not to work as hard at one company lean in and work harder at another. When they had the evidence that their hard work would pay off, they pushed further, and most of that gender wage gap disappeared. So one reason to share the story is for the audience to understand that truth. Choice is a complex issue, and people don't just make choices because of some weird biological difference. But the other is that research project took me 2 days to get started. Not because I let AI do it for me, but because I built the models, I explored the data using these tools. It was enormously empowering, not because I let AI do the work for me, but because I used it as a tool to explore the world in a way no one ever had before. And we're about to join our panel now to look more broadly about how AI is changing the internals of work. But I just want to throw that idea out there. When you're engaging with building product, with using AI yourself, always think, how is this making someone better? Not just making their life easy. How is it giving them what they need and not just what they want? That, to me, is how AI will transform work. So thank you so much. And I guess I'm going to invite everyone in on our panel so we can talk about evolution at work.
Thank you, Vivienne. I am just blown away and cannot wait to see where this conversation goes because AI is one of the top conversations. It must be like in the top three that is consistent every single day. Now, to further the discussion, please welcome to the stage Anusha Harid-Paoletti, CEO and founder of Liquidly, Helen Lee Kupp, co-founder and creator, Women Defining AI, and Keri Smith, managing director, global banking data and AI lead.
Thank you, Tammy. And Vivienne, I thoroughly enjoyed your keynote. So I think I have the coolest gig today because I get to not only share the screen with these amazing women, but I'm coming at this with a student mindset. So I'm really keen to kind of get into it with the three of you. Helen and Keri, inviting you to this screen as well. And before we get started, I come from a financial technology background, but I would love for each of you, and Vivienne, we got a kind of a taste of all that you touch, but would love to hear from Keri and Helen. Within the greater domain of AI, what's your space?
Sure. I'll go ahead, Helen. So yes, I lead our data and AI efforts at Accenture in financial services. So I work a lot with our banking and our capital markets clients, so wealth managers, asset managers as well. And I come to Accenture. I've been here for about 4.5 years, but I come through the fintech pathway, so more the entrepreneurial path. So I've been a founding member of several digital startups, and I've worked primarily within the financial services space, but also I would say life sciences and private equity as well. So if I look at where I am in this space, it's really helping kind of our end clients as they look to harness the power of this emerging technology.
Awesome. I'll dive in. So first, I'm so grateful to be here also with this incredible group of women, both on the panel as well as in the audience. I'm seeing a lot of comments come through already, which is awesome. My name is Helen Lee Kupp. I'm one of the co-founders of Women Defining AI, which is a community that aims to level the playing field for women in tech, starting with AI. And the space that I play in is effectively, our fundamental belief is that if we want more women in leadership within AI, we want more women defining AI, we fundamentally have to increase the number of women who are participating in AI and building intuition and experimenting with exactly what Vivienne said, not how can we, automate and replace the things that we do, but how do we think bigger about what we cannot do yet and what doors we open with this new technology. So that is the short version of Women Defining AI.
Well, thank you. And I was backstage and I made the joke to Keri, today's perhaps a rare day where open AI is not the headline on the newspaper today. But I would love, and we'll start with you, Vivienne. What excites you the most about generative AI at this moment in time? Perhaps also what fills you with some trepidation.
So I alluded to one of the big issues that fills me with trepidation, and I know why evoke the name if we don't want to talk about him, but I remember when Sam was in front of Congress saying, imagine a world in which every child has an AI tutor. And I can imagine that world. Apparently, he doesn't realize this has been researched for decades. AI in education is old school. And if the tutor ever gives the student the answer, they never learn anything. It really is shocking how robust a finding that is. This is a hard thing to do. And so this is what part of what I'm worried about is, again, what I alluded to before, that we keep going with this Silicon Valley ethos of let's make everything easier for everybody, instead of thinking, as I like to, I use, in my particular case, Gemini a lot, just because I have a lot of relationships at Google, and I use it regularly. I never let it write anything for me. It's just terrible. Even Claude is terrible, and GPT-4. Never in a million years. My unique voice is what's on the page, never some machines. What I do is I say, you, Gemini, are my worst enemy. You're my nemesis that has dogged me my entire career and found every flaw in my reasoning. Read my new essay, read my new scientific article, and tell me where I'm wrong. I actually use it to make my life harder, what we call productive friction. And that excites me. We do genuinely have an opportunity, a unique technology, not only the stuff I'd used a decade ago to do the research I just talked about, that requires incredibly specialized knowledge. And I hate coding, but I've done a lot of it. Now we have a technology anyone in theory could use, but it's how we use it that's going to really matter.
That's very helpful. Keri, I'll turn it over to you next. Same question.
Sure, absolutely. And I really loved some of the points that Vivienne made in the initial intro there. So if I think about what energizes me and excites me about this moment, I would say it's actually the power of reinvention that I would say is enabled by AI. And what do I mean by that? If I think about just some of the day-to-day activities that we do, for example, in the workplace, there are certain things that we are doing from tradition, legacy practices, etc. And also because we did not have some of the available tools and capabilities to be able to actually drive some of the value that we wanted to do in business. And I would say with a lot of what's being available with AI, generative AI as well, I do feel that there's a bit of energy rising and passion rising in organizations in terms of, hey, this is actually an opportunity for us to take a step back and actually think through what is it that we're really trying to drive as a business? What are the outcomes that we want to do? When we think about the target state, what does that truly look like? Now that we have actually that vision that we're all kind of aligned with and energized by, how do we think about AI as enabling that? So I find that it's unleashing quite a bit of creativity actually, and just new energy there. And, people are bringing their full selves to work. So whatever they're doing on the side and at home in terms of experimenting with some of these tools, then they're applying that also to say, okay, I don't actually need to look at business as usual, right? I can actually, in some ways, I'm going to say dream, right? And what is it that I truly imagined of what the future is going to be? And I think part of that also is looked at with a lot of the ease and I would say democratization of some of the AI tools. What we consider to be table stakes is continually rising. And so, firms and employees, people are just looking at how do I continue to be relevant, provide value, and just the theme of reinvention. So for me, that's actually very exciting. So I would say I'm a creative plus a scientist. So just being able to tap into some of that human potential and then see how we actually bring more value into some of what we're doing. So that's on the energizing and the positive side. What is my trepidation? Well, I would say one primary one for me is just in terms of having people feel that they need to sit on the sideline and that this space is a rarefied air, only eligible for a few, right? I think that's kind of where I have some concern, and I'm a big proponent of AI for good, but also that we need basically everyone involved in this. And this is something where anyone can learn anything. I do really believe that. It's really about your mindset and obviously access to the right support structures. But I do think if this is something where we do not have some of that diversity of voices and thought, we're not going to, one, be able to manage, I would say, some of the risk that's there, and also being able to help from a community perspective in terms of allowing people to have the right tools and access to what are some of the opportunities there. So trepidation is people sitting on the sidelines or thinking this is not really for me. I have to be a certain persona, profile, or skill set for me to be able to actually understand this and use it. So I try to do a lot around that AI literacy and education, but that would be where my trepidation would be.
Thank you, Keri.
Yeah, if I can just echo what Keri was saying super briefly, in a world in which we, at least in theory, have all of the world's answers in our pocket, whether it's a large language model, a large multimodal model, the images, all of that stuff is right here. Everything we have in common as a civilization is here. It is our unique voice, which is our value to the world. And it probably always has been, but now there's a kind of forcing function. You've got to find it and you've got to speak up because we don't need the same old answer. I have it free in my pocket.
Yeah, I'll echo that as I'll start with the trepidation and what you said, Keri, around seeing that people are sitting on the sidelines. It's the core reason why we started Women Defining AI. There was this data point that came out around this time last year that showed that women, I don't know why there's sound issues, but it showed that women were adopting AI at lower rates than men. Less than a third of women were using these tools and experimenting with it, compared to more than 50% of men. And this is compounded by the fact that there's a lot of experts that look at the different jobs that we all hold, and they do expect that jobs held by women are more likely to be eliminated by AI if we continue to think in this way. And so when I saw that data, my co-founder and I, we didn't know what we were going to do with it, but we knew we wanted to get more women at least experimenting. There was a question in chat around like, women are not participating now, so how do we get into this field? And I think that my answer tends to be just start experimenting, right? Build some familiarity with what this technology can and cannot do. It feels like, because of the terminology that we use around AI, machine learning, prompt engineering, that it feels overly technical. But, and this is sort of the thing that I'm really optimistic about, there is no better time to get into technical like things than now, when you can interact with machines with conversational language. To me, I'm most excited by the fact that building with technology, working with machines and software is easier and easier and more accessible. And to me, that means that there's going to be more people within communities with needs or pain points that could not be addressed by those who are traditionally leading in tech, who can now start to think about, how do I build solutions for myself, right? Like, so this is my personal example of this. I've had so many conversations. So I don't know how many are moms in this audience. I can't poll in this platform, but I assume at least a well-sized subset of this group. But if you're a mom or you're a caregiver of any type, right, you understand the pain of mental load. And more than that, you understand the challenge of explaining just how much of a pain mental load is, and how much of a real problem it is for people, even for people who care about you, AKA your partner. And I'm biased. I have the greatest partner in the world. He's awesome. He's a great husband and father to our 4-year-old and 2-year-old, wants to be engaged, and does everything to empower me to dream big. This is the same partner who, at 4 months after our second child, I kid you not, turned to me and he asked, "So are we close to that time where Sammy Sam starts to eat solid food?" It sort of felt like it was around this time, but it was just so seamless and easy, you know, with Ethan. It's just breastfeeding, then solids, then all the things. And that's when I turned to him and I said, well, first off, none of that was natural or seamless. Thank you. And second, I don't know what you think, but what do you think we've been talking about this entire time over the last two and a half years about mental load? And I think for the first time, maybe sort of, it kind of clicked for him, but only sort of, right? And the thing is, every mom I know wants some tool to solve mental load, because to all of us, it's a clear pain point. It's really hard, and we talk about it all the time in different mom circles of mine. But how do we expect people who don't understand it, who don't care about a problem as deeply as we do, to go and solve it? And then, but now think about, what if we can? What if the technology that we have access to now makes prototyping and building easier? Vivienne was talking about, so like some of us maybe code, some of us maybe don't code and don't run large data analyses. But what if we can do more of that now? We can start to ask these questions and explore solutions that we care deeply about. For moms who want to solve mental load, for I'm part of the sandwich generation who's looking for ways to find, ways to help like my aging parents remember medical instructions and when to take their medicines. For immigrants, right, who want to create better ways to support non-native English speakers to read and understand complex information. Just that to me is the most exciting part of not just getting women to participate, but starting to build those intuitions and figure out how can we turn them into solutions that like don't exist.
And Helen, I'm looking at some of the chat comments, and people are echoing the sentiment about, jumping in, getting in. And I'm curious, and I'll have you respond to this first before we have the others jump in as well. But it is hard to find the first entry point into a very large field that's evolving rapidly. What would you suggest? And this is for a broad segment of women in the audience from different career paths and sectors. Where would you suggest is the first step? Is it a ChatGPT subscription? Are there other resources that you like? Because I think, for the first panel this morning, which was about kind of diversity in the workplace, it is likely that in many countries, we're going to be working for much longer, given our lifespans. We're going to be in the workforce for longer. There could be multiple careers that women take on. So in this specific area about, starting your, information consumption and familiarity in the larger world of AI, what's a good launch point for you?
I really believe in learn by doing. And to me, learning happens best when you pick something that you want to try to build that's relevant to you in your life and your work, and then exploring what are the options to go and do that thing. And so I guess the way to start in my mind would be, look at the things in your work or life, look at sort of the problems or opportunities that exist, and dig into what available tools, maybe it is ChatGPT, to go and explore, can this start to solve that? I will also say that I recognize that is hard, right? It's like giving people a ton of Lego bricks and saying, go build a thing. It's super flexible. It's awesome as a tool to build incredible structures. But when you look at a blank page, it can be really hard. And so we try really hard, at least in the community, to create like a projects-based program where we, like the first module or first 3 weeks is advanced Gen AI use cases that just give you different projects and places to start around how you might use, text-based prompting, how you might use some of the multimodal stuff, how you might start to dive into data analysis. But either way, whether you want something a little bit structured or you want to kind of choose your own adventure, I say finding opportunities where you are passionate about a thing to solve in your life And then going deeper into figuring out and researching what are the options to solve it is by far the most fun way to learn, in my opinion. But like actually getting hands-on and learning by doing.
And that leads me to Vivienne. I want to talk about, you've done great work in tackling real world issues using AI. And you've mentioned your son's diabetes as one such real world issue. I would love for you to share kind of the issues that you've sought to tackle that are still on your wish list, and where you would think there are key targets for women to engage in devising solutions.
I definitely want to echo Helen in this idea of find something meaningful in the world, meaningful to you, and go work on it. My PhDs are computational neuroscience and psychology. I get introduced as being an AI expert. To me, it's a tool just so that I can understand what's going on in the brain or in people. And then I started a bunch of companies in education and workforce, and now back in neurotechnologies. These are just things that I wanted to solve. And I think there's been a problem of us educating a generation of largely young men to build ever more sophisticated models. And I'm thrilled there are some people that want to lean into that, not just men, and build those models. But my interest is, what am I going to do with them? And I think in the context of what we're talking about right here, one of the reasons AI often fails to solve problems in the real world is it's a hammer in search of a nail. And what I think, if we riff off of what Helen said, and we're all sort of nodding here, find a meaningful problem in your life. So many people have responded to what you said about mental load, cognitive load, emotional load. Find a meaningful problem in your life and think, how can I tackle it? And if you want to use AI as the tool for that, wonderful, because now it is so much more of an inclusive tool. I'm going to add this extra note. You're going to fail, and that's okay. Solving real world problems is hard. Learning how to work even with these modern tools is hard. Just stay with it. Be resilient. And it's easy for me to just say that. But what I'm telling you is it really will pay off. You go through this iterative process of finding something and working on it. Before the pandemic started, I ran into another woman at a conference at MIT, and we attended a talk about the genetics of gender. And this was about mice, but it was fascinating. And we thought, God, what if we had similar information, hormone, genetic, epigenetic, behavioral, on millions of human beings, and we could put that data together and truly understand who we are. And I'll be honest, if it isn't obvious to everyone watching it, I chose to be a woman later in my life. And the reason I chose it is I wanted to be a better person. And this is that better person. And in this case, although I'd never met her before, this woman I met at this conference made the similar choice. We wanted to understand what hormonally was going on inside our body. It was just a scientific curiosity. There's no business plan. There's no purpose. We were exploring and using AI to manage that exploration. Over the pandemic, it turned into a philanthropic project. Could we use what we were discovering to prevent suicides? Women have much higher rates of suicide in many points of life, particularly around pregnancy and postpartum depression, or wildly understudied perimenopausal depression, something which is in the future of the majority of people on the planet. And yet we know more about the surface of Mars than we know about menopause. And we ended up spinning off a startup from this purely philanthropic research because it turned out we developed the first ever biological test for postpartum depression. And it's predictive, so you can take it before you've ever delivered and begin treatment before you experience symptoms. And I'm immensely proud of that. But note that the narrative there, it didn't start with let's do something cool with AI or let's launch a company. It started with let's understand a problem. Who are we? And why does that get hard sometimes? And it turned into a couple of weirdos, if I may say so, congratulatory about myself, making a discovery that affects the vast majority of people on the planet in a positive way. Women will be alive because of this. Find these kinds of experiences. When my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, we hacked all of his medical equipment, developed the first ever AI for diabetes. Turns out I also broke a whole bunch of federal laws, but that's okay. I actually just got an invitation to the White House. They're having me back. I wore Google Glass to the White House once. There is Secret Service policy that has my name in it because of this. And they invited me back. They're crazy, crazier than me. This is the sort of thing you should find. Not the thing I'm telling you to do. Find that thing you are willing to make a sacrifice for, because it will be a sacrifice for a while as you figure out AI, as you figure out the problem. But lean into that and just let's break this habit of thinking bigger models with more parameters is the reason we go into this field. We go into it to solve problems.
And can I just comment on two things? One, this you will fail comment. You will. Actually, one of the most surprising things for women who join our community, who start to really experiment and build with AI, they come back to me and they're like, oh, prompting takes a lot of work. You know, like it takes a lot of iterations to get right. And then once we start to build like custom chatbots and all that, they're like, oh, it didn't work the first time. I'm like, yes, that's shockingly, right? When we build technology, it's a very iterative process. You start somewhere small, you build on top of that, you do a lot of debugging. It's a very natural part of building and prototyping anything. And so this, one of the beautiful things about learning together as a community is also just, we say this all the time, never let perfect be the enemy of good, right? It's quite important to get started, to iterate, to know that that's the process that you're going to go through, even in the learning journey, and be comfortable with that and just accept that as part of the process. That I think is really important, especially for women who, when I talk to women, sometimes when I host like workshops in person, we'll prompt people to like go explore some of these things, and I'll go to a table and I'll sit next to a small group and I'm like, so how's it going? They're like, well, we're looking through a couple options. I'm like, no, just go and just try. And I see like my job as being the person to sort of nudge in that direction. And that's always really helpful, but I really encourage to just do rather than try to take the right course or the certification, for example. Really just be open to iterating. And I will offer the counterpoint to you, Vivienne, that I do actually think that you want to find meaningful big problems to tackle and solve. But there is, on this journey of failure and feeling comfortable with iteration and not letting perfect be the enemy of good, I find that it's also equally good to think of like fun examples, fun things that you would really enjoy trying and experimenting with, and not making it such a big and serious endeavor, especially at the beginning, because then for a lot of the women in my life, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to get it right the first time. And so it is equally important to not take yourself too seriously sometimes, and do something fun. Like I do a lot of coloring pages with my son. He loves it, creating his own, for example.
You talk about fun, and I'm going to talk about the opposite and talk about policy now. And I want to loop in Keri, because we've talked about the inspiring and the fun, but I also think that there's some questions coming through in the comments about kind of what are the kind of existing biases that may be perpetuated. I think there's some concerns about discriminatory AI, but I think to really go at it, Keri, with what we've heard from Vivienne and Helen in terms of the moonshot. What do we need in terms of AI development safeguards? What government roles do you envision already in place? Where is there a vacuum? Would love to kind of get that side of the picture as well. So please.
Sure. And I would say, if I look at some of what we're talking about here, I think we can get some lessons learned also from some of the more highly regulated industries. right? So as we think about healthcare, life sciences, as we think about financial services, right? So there's already been, I would say, a very good muscle built regarding as we think about equity, as we think about fairness, right? As we think about then, when we're giving an offer and who gets to be able to, and what is the criteria that we're deciding about who gets a loan versus who doesn't, right? So I think there's some really good practices, disciplines, things already in place when we start to think about responsible AI, uses of data, what data can be used for what use cases, permissioning. So that's kind of one, which is let's look at some of the precedent and some of the good lessons learned. I think the other part of it is a reality, right? These AI, the algorithms, etc. I mean, they're learning from human behavior too, right? And what we're doing. So that goes back to my kind of original point in the beginning where I said people I would love for people to have more voices and diversity of voices in there, because that also helps, right, in terms of then as we're thinking about some of the decisions being made, right, some of the data being used, you have a bit more of a balancing, I would say, the broader mindset and voices that you have in play. So those are kind of a couple of different principles there. I do think one part of it, as we're looking at this, there's a spectrum of, I would say, sentiment that exists, right? I would say globally around AI, and AI has been around since the 50s, right? And we have seen both black and white and in color, right? Scary movies regarding what AI can mean and taking over for humans, etc. And what we're seeing with the advancement of technology is, while AI is surpassing some of our human capabilities, it's a great tool, right, for human augmentation. So I look at it as a human plus digital workforce and world, where we're leveraging AI to drive augmentation and things like that. But what I would say with some of that, maybe I would say fear or skepticism, sometimes there is a bit of a wait and see approach, or let's be a bit more conservative, right, with how we look at that. But technology does not wait, right? And nefarious actors do not wait as well. So I do think there's a big part of the governance of AI, regulation, but also businesses, communities as well, in terms of being able to do things at pace, right? So that we need to, for example, very simple example, as we think about some of the corporate phishing experiments that we have, right? The tests that we have on email, or some of the spam or fraudulent reach outs that we sometimes get, right? We do some training and education to be able to say, how is it that you can spot, right, that this thing is actually fake? It's not really your bank reaching out to us. With some of the advances that are happening in technology, right, these kind of nefarious activities become a bit more sophisticated, right? It takes in multimodality. We have examples where it's impersonating your financial advisor, right? Being able to have the tone of voice, the image, etc. So if I look at that as well, there is basically, I would say, some urgency regarding being able to move at pace as well with regulation, but also some of the protective mechanisms. And I would say generally raising the AI literacy overall, right? So there's a lot of good capabilities that come from the technology. And then we also need to have a community that's wise and aware, also to be able to understand when people are using it, right, for fraudulent activities. So, Anusha, if I look at it overall, I would say, hey, there's already some great precedent in terms of how people are leveraging and governing AI. Let's look at some of our highly regulated industries to get some of the lessons learned. But as we're looking at this space, looking at conversations around AI, we need to have multiple voices in play, but there's also an urgency in terms of pace of doing this, right? Yes, we can say, let's pause, let's wait, but that's not going to be an overall governing premise, right? It's still moving. So how do we actually be able to have kind of multi-speed that we're able to address that?
And shifting from, say, regulated industries to the creative industries, Keri, I know you're an artist. Vivienne, you write science fiction. I would love to hear from all three of you. What is the future of the creative career pathways? Kind of how should we be thinking about women in those fields, and the implications for their careers? Keri, I'll start with you.
Okay, sure. And I know Vivienne made a bit of a joke earlier in terms of like AI running the companies, etc. But when I look at it as well, I would say we're always going to be relevant as human beings, right? So as a species, we're going to always have relevancy there. And so even with a lot of the automation and animation and all of these things that come with artistry and what's available, I think a couple of elements. One is there's going to be, I would say, a boom in the legal industry as well, because I do think IP protections are extremely important, right? We need to be able to create like a fair working place for people as well. So if I'm creating something that is my unique intellectual property, we need to have protections for artists, right? And I think there is obviously we're seeing some lawsuits and things around that, but I think there's going to be a rise in some of the protections. And what does that look like? To be able to have right agency in terms of my creative pieces and my processes, and being able to at least have more people enter that space and not be robbed, right, of what they're doing. So I do think there's going to be a strengthening around IP protections and what does that look like. The other part of it that I look at is with all the things that are available with AI, there is still something that's there within kind of human empathy or reasoning or thought process differentiation and all of that stuff that we will still want, right, within the artistic process. So I look at it as, let's continue to be expressive. Let's make sure that we're creating kind of an equitable workplace and protection for people's art, as well as then how is it that we're actually leveraging AI to be able to help with some of the further automation. And in some ways, if we look at the history of what's happening within the creative industry as well, we would see that there's some parts of kind of digital creation, etc., that we no longer leverage humans for, right? We're using a lot of digital tools, but then we're rising in terms of what we're going to do from a human perspective. So that's the way that I always look at it. It's more that this is real. This is a capability that's there. How do I want to embrace it to leverage what I need? And also, it's not just going to be wishful thinking. We do need to have laws and protection in place, right, to make sure that we actually have some safe guardrails for people to be able to do their creative expression and also be paid fairly, right, for what they're doing. Vivienne, I'll hand the mic to you.
Terrific. First thing I'm going to do is shamelessly plug an op-ed I just wrote for the Financial Times that has a fairly provocative claim, which of course is 100% true because I said it, which is that modern AI and civil rights are simply incompatible. I know that sounds alarmist, but what I'm getting at is not whether AI is biased or not. It is inescapably biased. So are we. What are we going to do about that moving forward? That's the way to think about it. By the way, that's the way to think about using an LLM on a regular basis. It's going to give you biased answers because it was trained on us. How are you going to work with that in a productive way? But back to so you can find that it's also getting republished in the UC Berkeley Computer Science Department website, so you can find an paywalled version out there as well. But my claim in the end was we need a right to AI acting solely on our behalf, just as we have the right to a lawyer or doctor doing the same. We need fiduciary AI. And one of my recommendations around that, go check out the Human Trust, my nonprofit. It owns all of the data produced by my company that's doing the postpartum depression work. Why would we need to sell your data? We have a test that can save lives. If we can't build a business out of that, what are we doing? You should have the right to the privacy of your own body and the data coming out of it, period. Now, to the creative, I was asked to consult during the, for both sides, during the writer's strike in Hollywood. And I love what they came out with at the end, which is AI isn't an author. It can't get a writing credit. Whoever was involved in the production of that screenplay is the author. And no matter how much AI they used in the production of the screenplay, they get full credit and full payment for it. That is the appropriate way of thinking about it. Now, if you think you can just throw your screenplay idea into Claude or Blender or something, and you're going to get a good screenplay out, good luck trying to sell that. Although I say formulaic screenplays do sell well in Hollywood. But if you really want to write, whether it's nerdy science fiction or if you want to create, I actually gave a talk at the Lincoln Center a decade ago, where I said, if you are the director of animation for a show, you have an amazing future. If you are the head writer of a show, you have an amazing future. If you're a line animator or a staff writer, your job is to write what someone else tells you to in their voice. Now that should be scary to you. And I think there's a tension there. If everyone is, in a sense, the first order creator, how do you learn how to write a show? How do you learn how to create the visual palette, become a cinematographer, if all of this is just kind of being handed to you. I'm not saying this to be alarmist, but really we have to think about this as a creative industry. And by the way, sciences are a creative industry. Engineering is a creative industry. If there's already an answer to the question, AI does it better than us. It certainly does it cheaper. If there's no answer, if you have to explore the unknown, that's the job you want. That is the only job description across the board. It's elder care and dishwashing, or it's explore the unknown. And there's a huge negative labor demand in between those two job descriptions. Clearly, we want as many human beings to be on the creative side of that split. So I think there's something truly amazing, as everyone has said here, that creative potential of being able to use generative models to help you explore the world in a way that really has been difficult to do prior to that. But if you are not saying no to it, if you're not saying, no, wait a minute, that's not the equation that I want. I need an equation that I can break apart and factorize in this way, because math is also a creative endeavor. Why should I solve equations worse than an AI? My job is to figure out how to take an existing equation. Where can I substitute it in an approximation? How can I break it apart and factorize it so that I can actually take a nice linear derivation or approximately? And these are all creative endeavors. They're all answers to unasked questions. And your job is to figure out the question. And it probably sounds daunting and maybe exhausting, thinking that your job for the rest of your life is going to be exploring and exploring and exploring. But here's the wonderful part of that, in a little bit, not contrast to what Keri was, the sentiment of what she was saying, but the implication of it is there's a finite number of known answers. And yeah, GPT has most of it encoded in its parameters. There is an infinite space of unknown questions. We have an infinite amount of work in front of us. We always will. That should be an amazing and I hope uplifting thing, especially if you see all jobs as fundamentally creative. But yes, if you want to nerd out on your next science fiction endeavor, please don't let GPT write it for you. Like, again, use it in productive ways to explore, as an audience member, as a board audience member, as your favorite reader. How are they going to respond? These are spaces in which it becomes a really productive tool.
And Helen, I'm going to come back to the point you made when you talk about, you have kids and there are other parents in the audience. I don't think it's possible to have this conversation about the evolution of careers without talking about the evolution of education. And Vivienne, your book behind you, How to Robot Proof Your Kids, is prompting me as well. How should we be thinking about the next generation and educating our children for a world of work that we ourselves are on the frontiers of? What would you suggest? I'll turn over to you, Helen, first.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask Vivienne about her book. But, honestly, I'm an optimist at heart, especially around technology. And one of the ways I think about it with my kids is not, I think, finding ways to shift both how we teach our kids, but I would love to get into schools and help teachers and admins think about this differently, not using AI as a write this essay for me, for example, but really, like Vivienne said, creating productive friction, right? One of the most powerful ways to think about this is, instead of having AI write the essay for you, can it offer various viewpoints? I think one of the things we're missing right now in society is the ability to critically think about all different layers of the argument and then form our own opinion and perspective about it. So how can we just bake that into the ways in which we use AI and technology to reteach not just our students and our children, but everyone? There's a beautiful use case from my co-founder where she talks about how AI, her use case is, how do I use AI to find my blind spots when I write a piece of communication, to offer me that feedback of some perspective that I have not thought about, or is not my natural perspective. And I think that flip in paradigm of using AI as a way to augment, a way to flip the ways in which we teach, and help focus education around the thing that we want education to focus on, which is critical thinking, asking questions, right? Rather than just memorization or facts. We want to make, actually, I personally would love to make everyone a scientist, right? To be able to ask the questions, explore solutions, and go and have tools to go find answers on their own. Like, that would be incredible. And one of my favorite parts of learning was doing exactly that. And somehow our education system, because of the way it's structured, because of the way we pay and incentivize our teachers, has not been that. And so when I think about the opportunity in education, I'm not scared. I think about all of these unlocks that we can really bring into our current educational system. And I don't know how yet, but it's definitely top of mind for me.
And we have a lot of questions coming in, so I want to kind of also just pivot to addressing topics that are coming through. So Keri, there's a phrase you used, AI literate, and there are a couple of people that want you to double click on that. Kind of, how would you define being AI literate, and how does that tie into being competitive in the job market? So I think if you could kind of touch on that, a couple of questions there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk about AI literacy, I would say part of it is just understanding when we're talking about AI, what are we really talking about, right? So meaning, because I think there's a lot of, I would say, hype, confusion, as well as then people not necessarily understanding what to use for kind of what kind of problem set or use case, right? So when I talk about AI literacy, it's an understanding of, first of all, what is it in this space? What does it mean? When we think about kind of machine learning, deep learning, when we think about generative AI, what are these capabilities? And also then how can they actually be used? And why I speak about this a lot, as we start to think about people actually getting and using these capabilities, particularly in companies, when we look at AI adoption, one of the big parts that we see that helps actually with a lot of the AI adoption is just understanding, for people to also understand what these capabilities are, how can they be used, as well as then also as they're working with, so for example, their risk and compliance team, right? How is this going to be used? How is it going to be making the decisions? So AI literacy really is just meaning the understanding of what's within the family, the umbrella of AI. What are those capabilities, and what are the ways that you can actually practically apply that? Now, if I think about then what does it mean from a business perspective and being competitive, what we're seeing on their statistics around this as well, which is more and more of the employee base who are actually leveraging AI for some of their day-to-day tasks and opportunities are outperforming those who are not, right? So there's applications, for example, if I think about a developer, right, and using that to be able to accelerate some of the activities around code development. Or if I'm a risk and compliance manager, how is it that I actually get a lot faster to the information sets that I need to make a decision? Or if I'm thinking about, I'm a marketer and I'm trying to think about reaching to my different customer segments, right? I have these different personas that are there. What's the tone of voice and an initial first draft of what this can actually look like? And then how do I tailor it? So there's a lot of efficiency that's available to be able to, in some ways, help, I would say, with some of the routine tasks, but also, I mean, AI is really, really great at also mining very quickly, like large amounts of information sets, being able to detect pattern, right? And giving us some of that first start. So it's I would say, I always talk about it as your AI intern, your AI buddy, right? It's just your partner as you are actually doing different things in your activities, and how is it actually helping you. But as I said, we're seeing that as a data point. I think final point I'll make on that is, as we looked at generative AI and different organizational policies around how companies were embracing it, I think after a while people saw that, okay, we may be saying no about it. People are using it on their own time. But also what we're starting to see is that, for example, people who are using it for code development, etc., they're just able to get things done a lot faster, right? And then move on to the next activity. So I think a big part of the AI literacy is, yes, understanding, but with understanding also comes, I would say, lessening of some of that fear and anxiety, and a better understanding of just practical applications, right, of how this can be useful for you.
Thank you. And we're coming up against time, so I want to kind of go with our final question. I'll start with you, Vivienne, but I want to have Helen and Keri respond to the same question. 5, 10, 20 years out, what does the future look like for you? With kind of any aspect, what is it you hope for? It's like the big blue sky picture that I want to end with.
For me, my whole life and career has been, how do we build better people? Which, by the way, should terrify everyone, because I am a neuroscientist and I do literally mean jamming things into people's brains. But I also mean it in a very human sense. And for me, I'm not really either a utopianist or a dystopianist. The future is a choice. Are we going to choose to use AI to make people better? Or are we going to use it to substitute for people? And it is entirely our choice. So my future is in education, in health, in human development. I'm choosing to use this to help people, and only give them the things they need, not the things necessarily that they want. And that's my ethos in how I go forward. And I really hope everyone else takes that choice very seriously and thinks hard about it.
Thank you. Helen, over to you. Same question.
I don't claim to be able to predict the future, but I'll tell you the future that I hope for, want, and am building towards in my choice. In every conversation I've had like this, where it's a panel of women or in a community of women, I am so optimistic about the ways in which we want to shape the world, about focusing on what are those use cases, where can we have the most impact in solving real problems for real people. And so the future that I want is for more women to just step into the game and say, how can I find a way to use this technology in ways that solve those big, useful, valuable problems that nobody has been thinking about, that nobody has cared to solve for people who really, really matter in our lives, in our communities. I want to see that in 10, 50 years, that there are more women at the helm making decisions about technology, more women creating great solutions, products, businesses, whatever, everything in between. Every single time I've had this experience, I've been floored by our capacity to care for the people around us. And so that's what I hope for.
I echo the sentiment, and I'll give Keri the last word.
No, thanks, Anusha. So I would say that the future is bright. And for me, I'm actually very energized about the fact that with a lot of AI and partnering with AI, there's a freeing up of, I would say, a lot of intellectual capacity in terms of us getting more value in and more waste out of some of the day-to-day stuff that we're doing. And with that freeing up of intellectual human capacity, I'm just excited about basically directing that to some of those tougher areas and what that may mean, right? So sometimes I have some of these conversations and I would say, why don't we actually tackle world peace, right? Or world hunger and things like that. And it may sound a little bit facetious, but really, truly being able to have that amount of intellectual capacity that's now available, purposing that for good, I'm actually very optimistic in terms of what may be possible for us as a human race, right? In terms of then being able to charge forward, I would say, in more effective and value additive ways.
Wonderful. I really thank the three of you for making time. I found this to be enlightening, and I cannot tell you how many follow-ups I have. So I hope the audience feels the same way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is great.
Tam, you're on mute, my dear.
I did not know that I was on mute. Okay. Thank you, Anusha, Helen, Keri, and Vivienne, for this enlightening discussion. We know that there's so much more to learn about AI. And when Vivienne said we know more about the surface of Mars than about menopause, it resonated with many in our audience. AI is evolving really, really fast. And while we can embrace it for solving problems, you have to be ready to fail and keep in mind to not let perfect be the enemy of good. See there, I was really listening. So there's a lot of potential and opportunity. Let's be open-minded, get creative with it. And finally, to quote Fifi Lee, artificial intelligence is not a substitute for human intelligence. It is a tool to amplify human creativity and ingenuity. And I imagine a world in which AI is going to make us work more productively, live longer, and have cleaner energy. All things that are important, I'm sure, to most of us. It's now time for our Career and Opportunity Expo. You'll be able to talk directly with recruiters from Accenture, Alliance Services, Insurance Services, Diego, New York Life Insurance, Bay State Financial, She Should Run, and All In Together. You can get there by clicking the Expo button on the left side of your screen. It's been an honor for me to be your MC for the first half of the Mobilize Women's Summit 2024. And be sure to meet us back on the main stage at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time for our panel on Women's Health Uprising, Rights, Access, and Action. Have a great day.